The defense opening was by Alec Spiro. Alec Spiro is in the middle here. He did everything today for the defense. I did cross on all the witnesses, did the opening statement. And it was, I got to say, a pretty weak opening statement. Mostly they tried to, move the ball. These are not the facts you're looking for to the jury. Try to change the legal argument from what the indictment actually calls for to something else, because what the indictment actually calls for is easily provable here by the state. So that's not good for the defense. So he keeps trying to change the subject. It was quite emotional. I thought he was somewhat disorganized, which really there's no excuse for that. They've had months, years to prepare for this. He just wanted to talk anything other than the material facts of the case, the elements of the crime. Sure, this was somebody's fault, but whoever's fault it was everybody but their client. Talked a lot about how movies are make-believe and the rules should be different for a movie set, even though they're not, right? Involuntary manslaughter. The statute doesn't say, unless you're on a movie set, unless you're an actor, there's no exceptions in the law for being on a movie set. But he said there should be. And he told a lot of half-truths, which I guess some could characterize as lies. And overall, I would give him a grade of maybe a 4 to 5 out of 10. It just was not good. Again, he's limited. I don't mean to criticize him as an attorney. He's really limited by what his client gave him. So he characterized this as a tragedy, but not a crime. Actors play characters that can do lethal things. We all see in movies, people shoot at each other because these things are not actually lethal on a movie set. The cardinal rules of gun safety, he said, don't apply on a movie set. That's a little awkward because, well, they do. I mean, the movie industry says they do. So that was, I think, an argument that's going to come back to haunt him. And then he wanted to, change the focus of the jury to things that don't matter. He said the first critical issue is not Baldwin's recklessness, but how did a real bullet make it onto the movie set? Obviously, Baldwin had nothing to do with the bullet getting to the movie set, right? So if you can convince the jury that's the issue, well, then Baldwin's in the clear. No one's arguing he had anything to do with that. Then he told one of his many half-truths. He said, and you can't distinguish a real bullet from a dummy just by looking at it. Well, that's sometimes true, right? Because we have dummies that have BBs in them that you have to shake to know they're dummies. They externally look just like a real bullet until you shake it. So you can't tell the difference between those two just by looking at them. That's why there's another means to tell. Then they have the dummies with the hole drilled in the side. Obviously, those are visually different. Or the dummies with the primer removed. Those are visually different. So when he phrases it so carefully, you can't distinguish real bullets from dummies simply by looking at them. It's obviously disingenuous. And just like with the state, when I mentioned, if the jury concludes you're just bald-faced lying to them, why should they believe anything you say? Any argument you make, any evidence you offer. He said there should never have been a real bullet on the movie set. True enough. And that makes, he says, real bullets on the set being unforeseeable, completely unpredictable. And therefore, the notion that Baldwin's gun, even though he knew it to be a real gun, even if you believe he cocked the hammer, even if you believe he pulled the trigger, the death of Helena Hutchins was completely unforeseeable. No one imagined that there could be a real bullet in the gun. Except, again, they run into the problem of these SAG safety guidelines. If that was really true, if everybody in the industry believed it was impossible for a real bullet to be in the gun, why do we have these rules? Why does SAG have a rule say never point a firearm at anyone? Never place your finger on the trigger until you're ready to shoot? Why? Because these guns are dangerous and can kill people. That's why. So again, a weak argument. So not only did he want to focus on how the bullet got on set, but then he wanted to focus on how the round got into the gun. Because, of course, nobody claims that Baldwin loaded the gun. So it's the armorer's fault for putting the bullet in there. Fair enough. She got convicted and is serving time right now for involuntary manslaughter. It was the first assistant director who was overall supervision for safety on the set, David Halls, his fault for not spotting the live round on the gun. Fair enough. He took a plea deal. So he's convicted of a crime for his errors. Seems genuinely remorseful, by the way, David Halls. But they seem to be implying that if other people were at fault, then Alec Baldwin can't be at fault. And of course, that's not the case. Everyone's at fault for what they did. Hannah Gutierrez is at fault for allowing live ammo on the set. David Halls is at fault for not catching the live round in the gun before he called it a cold gun. And Alec Baldwin's at fault for pointing what he knew a real gun to be directly at a woman, cocking the hammer, pressing the trigger, and shooting her dead. Alec Spiro talked about all Baldwin knows is that the gun placed in his hand had been declared safe. Baldwin's mind is on the role of the character. He's 100 years in the past in his mind for this Western. He's worrying about acting, not about gun safety. And again, that sounds good until, again, you look at the SAG guidelines, because they don't say as an actor you have no responsibility for safety. They say the opposite of that. As an actor, you are ultimately responsible for your own safety and the safety of your fellow cast members. Safety is everyone's responsibility. It doesn't go away for the actor. And all these SAG guidelines, the state has a witness who's going to testify at length, who helps draft these safety guidelines for the industry. That's going to testify about all of this extensively. Again, he does this kind of deflection. Don't look at the material facts and elements of the crime. Look at other stuff. Everybody in the movie set has a role. Armorer does armorer work. Director directs. The actor acts. He's not responsible for safety, except the Screen Actors Guild disagrees. The actor still has responsibility for safety. Nobody imagined there could be a real bullet in the gun. Then he really missteps. He says, hey, when 911 was called, the defense loves this. The people who called 911 said, hey, we've had an accidental shooting on a movie set. Some of these people didn't even see the shooting. They don't really know if it's an accident. They're using accident in the colloquial sense, not in the legal sense. Accident is a legal term of art, meaning there's no legal liability if it's a genuine accident. This is not a genuine accident. A genuine accident in this scenario would have been if a part of the set collapsed onto Alec Baldwin, and that's what made the gun discharge. So then he would have no culpability. He had played no role, no affirmative role. He didn't decide to discharge the gun. He didn't decide to engage in unsafe conduct. The set fell on him. That's a genuine accident. That would be an excusable homicide. Still a homicide, but an excusable homicide with no legal liability, not even civil liability. But that's not what happened here. Alec Baldwin took deliberate, specific actions. He deliberately pointed the gun at Helena Hutchins. He deliberately cocked the hammer. He deliberately pulled the trigger. That makes this not an accident. That makes this reckless conduct for which manslaughter is the appropriate charge and crime. Then he said this wasn't even treated as a crime at the time. Everyone just kept calling it an accident. No one was thinking of this as a crime scene. This was a bad misstep. Both his emphasis on accident and his misdirection that everyone thought of it as an accident, not a crime scene, really came to hurt him later. Of course, he said the police made mistakes. They had never investigated a shooting on a movie set before. That's both to undermine the perceived credibility, authority of the investigation. Defense attorneys always do this. The investigation was inherently incompetent, therefore you shouldn't trust anything that comes out of it. That's in almost every criminal defense. But also, look how unusual this was. These police, career law enforcement, had never before encountered a shooting on a movie set. It's so rare, that makes it unforeseeable. And it needs to be foreseeable, right? Now, of course, it's important to keep in mind, foreseeability doesn't mean certainty. It means, foreseeable. This could happen. For example, a very common form of reckless involuntary manslaughter is a drunk driving homicide, vehicular homicide. So someone gets drunk at a bar, they get behind the wheel to drive home. They don't want to hurt anybody. That's the last thing in the world they want. They just want to get home. But they know when they're driving drunk, they're creating an unjustified risk of death to others. And if they happen to run Granny over in the crosswalk on the way home, that's involuntary manslaughter. Every day of the week and twice on Sundays. Now, the fact that it was 3:00 in the morning and it was highly unlikely that Granny would be in the crosswalk at 3:00 in the morning does not make it not involuntary manslaughter. It can be an unlikely event. I would expect that the people who drive drunk very rarely actually kill someone. But the consequence when they do it is so severe, the death of a human being, it's a foreseeable consequence of drug driving. You can foresee that this will happen. It's not completely unpredictable. That's what foreseeability means in this context. So he wants to focus on everything else other than what Alec did. On the bullet, he says, the prosecution doesn't want to focus on what matters. What matters is the bullet. Where to come from, how to get in the gun. They want to focus. They have a bright, shiny object they're fascinated with. Poor Alec Baldwin. He talked, of course, about how they sent the gun for testing that they knew would destroy the gun. Destroy the gun! The gun was destroyed! This would come back to hurt him too, I believe. Of course, the gun was broken by the FBI, but two very tiny parts were broken. And they were sent back, of course, with the gun. The gun is visible to the jury. They saw it today. So the cylinder's out of it, and there's a little plastic container with the broken parts in it. But the whole gun's there. Obviously, the gun, it wasn't destroyed. It wasn't eradicated. It wasn't vaporized. It was not inevitable that this would break the gun. This was not an expected outcome. They knew it was possible that this testing with the mallet could damage the gun, but it wasn't inevitable. They didn't know it was going to happen. He argued that unless Alec knew the bullet was in the gun, it can't be a homicide case. And he really misled the jury on what homicide means. He's trying to make them think, well, then it can't be a murder case. But there's many forms of homicide. There's an intentional unlawful killing would be a murder form of homicide. And an intentional lawful killing, like in self-defense, would be a lawful homicide. Wouldn't be a crime at all. They're both homicides, but one of them's murder, life in prison without possibility of early release, and the other one's not a crime at all, even though they're both homicide. And in the middle, there's a reckless homicide, where you did not have an intent to kill someone, but you intentionally acted in a reckless manner that resulted in death. They're all homicides. So this was a homicide. All homicide means literally is one person killed another person. That could be justified like self-defense. It could be excusable like an accident. It could be intentional like a murder. It could be reckless like involuntary manslaughter. They're all homicides. So that kind of wrapped up the opening by Alec Spiro. Again, I'd give him a 4 to 5, I think, out of 10. And that's including a margin of error for the fact that he has bad law and facts to work with. It wasn't that good. Sorry. Even though I'm sure he's absolutely a world-class attorney. You don't get the job he has without being super sharp, super capable. Worth keeping in mind, by the way, I mentioned that Kerry Morrissey as a career defense attorney and just got picked to be a special prosecutor here and seems to have trouble with the transition from a defense mindset to a prosecutor mindset. These counsel for the defense here, these guys on the left, they're both civil litigators. I think Luke Nikas might have been a prosecutor sometime in the past, but their big time career, the one that makes them all the money now, for Quinn Emanuel, like what they're partners for, is civil litigation. And I see them making missteps between transitioning from the mental state for civil litigation to criminal law. It's not the same. The legal doctrines are not the same. The legal arguments are not the same. So that could be a cause of some missteps there.